Greetings and welcome to another virtual tour with the Decorative Arts Trust. I'm Matt Thurlow, the Executive Director. This afternoon we have the great privilege of being at one of the most exceptional early 18th century houses in Virginia. Today we find ourselves at Sabine Hall in Richmond County on what's known as the northern neck of Virginia, and it's such a great privilege to be welcomed here by our old friend and Board of Governor with the Decorative Arts Trust, Ralph Harvard, who's going to introduce this incredible home and its rich family history to us this afternoon. So Ralph, thank you so much for having us again.
Oh, thanks, Matt. It's always a pleasure, and thank Carrie, who does such a fantastic job. I mean, we're starting to have a good time with these. I think we're going to have to do some more.
I hope so.
Okay, well, let's get going. We are here at Sabine Hall. It's in Richmond County, Virginia. And to orient you, we're on the Rappahannock River, generally right across from Tappahannock. Tappahannock, which was first named by John Smith in 1608. So we're in an area of great early history. Part of this land adjacent was owned by Robert King Carter, and that's where our story really begins. Robert Carter owned more land and more slaves than anybody else in this country in the 1730s. And he made sure that his children married well and that they were each taken care of. Now, Landon Carter, who built this house, was the fourth son. He'd been sent to England at age 9 to study, and he came back, and of the children, he was really the most industrious, and he worked hard to... We're having some work done over here, which is great.
Learning about historic house preservation in the action.
Yeah, that's right. There's always something happening. So Landon Carter came back. He also had 3 advantageous marriages, and so he got some land and some dowry with his wives, but he was also industrious, and he collected land and was able to have 35,000 acres by the time he finally died in the 1770s. But this was the center of his property. This was Sabine Hall. And he started building in 1738. It's been dendrochronology is where you test the wood, and it showed that these timbers were cut in 1738. King Carter, his father, had died 5 years before, and he left a huge will, 30 pages, and by the time it was settled, his sons were coming into money and could build these houses. Shirley over in Charles City was being built at exactly the same time with the same kind of inheritance, as was Cleve up the river with his brother Charles. But Landon built this house starting in 1736, started collecting bricks, burning bricks. He kept an extensive diary. We know exactly who the brick mason was and who the carpenters were as well. So we've got great history on this house. Now, it was first built, it was not a Virginia-style house. You know, think of the Wythe House or Carter's Grove. You know, they were big, sort of slightly plain brick houses. But this is more in the Baroque taste, sort of a little wild and crazy house with an elaborate decoration on the sides, in the middle, and it had a steep hip roof. Carrie, you have an image there of the house as first built, I think.
We should take this opportunity to acknowledge Margise Howell, former governor of our board, who's with us today and lending a helping hand.
So that's my sketch of what the house looked like. It did have a much steeper roof. The house stayed in the family, in the Carter family, for a good amount of time. In the 1820s, Landon Carter's grandson, Robert Wormley Carter, did some remodeling. He added the portico, he lowered the roof, and he painted the whole house white. Hope y'all can hear me. We got lots going on, so let's walk up a little closer. You can see the house is built in typical Flemish bond. In the 1730s, they're still having glazed headers, so it creates sort of a checkerboard pattern. How you doing? We're good. So the brick decoration here is especially complex and involved. So you had the main walls, which were Flemish bond with glazed headers. As first built, these headers, these silver glazed headers, would have been very sparkly and mirror-like. And then, super rare for Virginia or even for America, they had these stone sills that were horizontal, straight across, and they also had a lintel up top of the same local stone. So you had these great horizontals going across. But then to counteract that, they rubbed the bricks between the sill and the lintel. So you had these frames around the window, these real strong frames, very dramatic. I mean, as we said before, this house was lamb-washed white in the 19th century, so it's diminished a bit of that contrast. But as first built, you'd have these silver bricks, these bright red, sort of vermilion bricks framing the windows, and then the lintel and the sill, which were actually lamb-washed white in the 18th century. So you'd have this bright red, you'd have bright white, and bright mirrored colors. So the house was sparkly and quite amazing as first built. Not like a Virginia house that we're used to, or even an American house. This was more of a European taste house. But while we're right here, all the windows were replaced by Robert Wormley Carter, including the basement windows, but one basement window does survive, and we've got an image of it right here, and you can see the muttons are almost 2 inches thick. And it's arched. Originally this was an arched opening, which is much more typical of the 1730s. Would y'all like to go inside? I bet you would. So let's head in. Originally the house was approached with a big rectangular driveway. And you can see the remnants of it here where it sort of slightly drops off around us. But there was a drive that went around here with balanced dependencies, the garden on the other side, which we'll see in a bit. Oh, Margie's, it's just too windy for us. We've lost these two outbuildings and this one. But this kitchen building has been incorporated into the current kitchen. These two dependencies still survive, and the garden is still intact in the back. So let's walk in as we slow down here and look down on the back. Landon Carter added a piazza or a porch where he exercised. He would walk a mile every day on the piazza when it rained. And these are the original stone paving blocks from that piazza. The floor has since been replaced. And if you look up these details, we've got this centerpiece here that is all in this Aquia type stone with the sort of rustication up at the top is pretty darn bold, and that keystone is just a monster, a terrific thing. The glory of this house really is it has two of these vast spaces. These are as larger rooms really as you get in the 18th century. And it was a strange plan that you don't see much. There was a house in Charleston, the Pinckney Mansion, which had this plan, and also there's a room at the Met also that came from upstate New York. And so the Van Rensselaer house. And you'd have these halls with no stair. They really were big party rooms, and the stair was set to the side. So you had two of these grand rooms, fully paneled, the articulated cornice, and all the details, all these molding details taken from Palladio Londinensis, which we'll see in a second. This was originally furnished with three bookcases, which are still in the house, and two lanterns. But currently it's kind of a mishmash. The windows are being worked on, so we're seeing this sort of under wraps and in the process. But as long as we're talking under wraps, there is one cool thing we should look at as long as we're here. In the 1760s, Landon Carter hired William Buckland to do some work for him here at the house and also at the house of his sons. And at the same period, he did have this potty chair made locally, and whether it was made by Buckland's shop or not, we don't know. There's no real record of Buckland making a chair for him, but this chair does have all the details taken directly from Thomas Chippendale's director. I mean, all of these elements can be traced right to the director. So somebody was paying close attention, and they weren't particularly furniture makers. You know, this looks like it could have been made by a frustrated house builder rather than a proper furniture maker. But it was made locally. Maybe it shows a little bit of Irish influence, or maybe it's Buckland. But it's an amazing piece of Virginia furniture from the 1760s. Now I think we'll head into the parlor. This house was laid out with 2 rooms on each side of the hall, 4 principal rooms. And these 2 rooms were the public rooms. Could be the parlor, the largest room in the house outside of the hallways, and then sort of a small dining room. We do have Landon Carter's inventory, and it lists these rooms as a parlor. This had 5 family portraits, and a small dining room with a large walnut table. But this room does have the most elaborate floor in the house, which, you know, this is a bit nerdy. There's a spot over here, I think, that you can really see that the floor was not only carefully cut, but it was pegged together, and it was also secret nailed together. This is a heavily used area where it's worn, the floor is worn down enough that we can see the pegs and the nails. But think how hard that was to set these 20-foot long boards into each other, into pegs, into like 30 pegs in each one, and then secret nail them as well. Super elaborate. And nobody could see that, but it was an indication that this was the best floor, and this is the best floor in the house. And the floors do vary from room to room, so it's giving us that signal of what's going on. Now, there was also a closet here, which did have a window, and it is used as a closet today, but it was first built. I'm going to get Carrie to just do an awkward but quick shot of looking up into there. It does have a fully finished articulated cornice, and it is fully paneled. It originally had a window that let light, so this was some sort of small office or, you know, major room of some sort. I mean, look at all of that almost waste that they did with the cornice. I mean, it's so extravagant for a closet. So this was more than a closet. Now, by the time Landon died, it was a closet. It had over 250 pieces of china and dishes and glasses in here, because this place was a party house. He gave parties all the time, and he had tons and tons of the equipage necessary for major parties. Now, in the 19th century, the doorway was cut bigger between the 2 rooms to create sort of a Victorian double parlor. And we do have a copy of Palladio Londinensis here, which was first published in the 1720s and again in the 30s. And if you look at these details carefully, they are duplicated in the cornice or the entablature above the fireplace. These originally, all the fireplaces in the house originally had marble manels, and they were all taken out and put in the basement in a busted up state. But the one for in here was a white marble mantel with double keystones, fluted keystones in the center. It does survive in busted up parts. And this was used as a small dining room. There was a secret stair that was back here, entered from outside, which could go upstairs and then downstairs to the wine cellar as well. And if we go across, those are the two public rooms, and on the opposite side were two bedrooms in the period. Now, by the early 19th century, this room that we're getting ready to go into had become a library, and it's generally interpreted as that now. The bedrooms, instead of having marble mantels, all had these red sandstone mantels, and some of them had beautiful faces like this with bows of fabric, and then others had grotesque faces. I mean, scary. Like if you were a child, you would not want to see them. This is the top of one mantel and the bottom of another that's been assembled. They were in the best condition of all the mantels, so they have been put back here just to give you an idea of what it looked like. That's Landon Carter with his pet dog up there, probably by Hyselius, original picture that's never left the house. And his inventory does list two large mugs with silver mounts, and this is one of those. It might have been a brush pot to start, or it may have been a mug that the handle broke off, but it was adapted in the 18th century. Some thought that this was called Robert King Carter's, but I think, frankly, it's probably too late for that. I think it was Landon Carter's, one of his 2 cups listed in the inventory. But Carrie, look at this face. It's a beautiful little thing there.
Filming. Is that a Mitchell?
Yeah. Now we do have a portrait here of Robert King Carter, who really, everybody who's anybody is related to him in Virginia. No recent U.S. presidents are related to this Carter, but I guess the Harrison presidents were his descendants as well. But this has always been in the house as well, and it seems like he provided portraits of himself for all of his children. There's an original portrait of him also at Shirley, and there's one listed at Cleve. And I think there was one at Rosewell, but I can't quite remember. But great portrait. There are only, I think, 2 proper portraits of him that survive, and there might be a third that's a little iffy. And then behind us here, we have his wife's portrait, Elizabeth Willis. She was his, I think, second wife, but she was the mother of Landon Carter. Beautiful, beautiful portrait. Said to be painted in England, but I think it could easily be an American portrait. Very playful, and she's actually kind of attractive. And we've also got 2 portraits of his first 2 wives. He recently married Elizabeth Wormley over here to the left. She was from a great plantation called Rosegill over in Middlesex County. She came with plenty of money and ancient family history. And then if that wasn't good enough, after she died, he married his 15-year-old sister-in-law, Maria Bird, daughter of William Bird. And so that cemented some great gardeners and architectural aficionados. Sadly, she didn't live too long either, and he had a third wife named Elizabeth Beale, who he didn't really like her. The Beales were old family, but he called her derogatory names that I won't quote here. So I think that's about it for this floor. I don't know, did you want to take one peek out the door? Just, it's so beautiful. There is an image that we're going to look at shortly that shows that there was a vista cut through to the river. It's just over a mile, and you can still see remnants of that vista cut all the way through. In the period in Virginia, they didn't build right on the water, very, very rarely. The commercial aspects weren't so appealing, and the Rappahannock along here is kind of marshy, which is wonderful for duck hunting, but you don't want to be down in the lowlands, very buggy. So he really built on an escarpment very high up above the river. Would y'all like to go upstairs? Or did we? Well, let's go look at that. Let's go look at that image real quickly, because we can do that. We've got a couple of treats in the additions to the house. Now, Carrie, as long as we're going, this is a great close-up of the stair. These are walnut balusters, black walnut balusters, and they're identical to those at Westover Plantation, which Landon Carter actually supervised the building of, we think. And they're similar to Christ Church and Rosewell and several Carter-related houses. This little detail here with the scroll work is identical to Christ Church. And this stair was actually built with no support originally. It's been mucked with some, but it was a free-flying stair. If you want to look back, I'm going to tell Carrie not to like bend up unnaturally, but it's pretty cool when you look up underneath here. It is fully finished, like you see in Annapolis later, and it's surely built at exactly the same time. And we're moving now into the, this is actually a mid-20th century addition to the 18th century kitchen and children's wing. And there are a couple of interesting things here. Did we say that the house has still remained in the family? Because, of course, that's true. It has. But this is the plat showing the land. There's still maybe 2,200 acres with this property. And here's sort of a cartoon of the house. It really just represents a house. And then here's that vista. See, it actually says Visto down to the river. I love that. And then while we're in here, there was one table that they found in the barn when they began restoration here. It is a locally made table, whether it was by maybe the Irish. There were some Irish furniture makers here. It's suffered over the years being in the barn. The top is replaced, actually made by the current owner. But these details are just super, super Virginia, and there's almost sort of duck-like feet. You see those up here around Tappahannock and Fredericksburg. So it's a neat little fragment, sort of a cool thing that tells us a good story and shows that they bought locally. But really, the grandest piece of furniture in the house is in here. And this table is reputed to be Robert King Carter's dining table. And if you look at this wood, this figured mahogany is quite exceptional. Even though it's been added to here at the end, this is original. It was just made this way as first built because they couldn't get the mahogany quite wide enough when it's this grainy. For years this was called walnut, but a recent analysis has showed that it is actually this curly mahogany. And it was probably made by Peter Scott in Williamsburg. He was a great furniture maker, worked for George Washington and the whole everybody in Virginia who was anybody. But this is sort of a distinctive curve that you see on his tables, and also these big pad feet up on a little bit of a platform. But great table, vast size. I can't think of any other southern tables that are round that are larger than this or even this big. There may be a few Yankee pieces, but even those are pretty rare. And so basically we're walking in what was originally a bowling green was underneath here, but the Carter attached the house to the kitchen, and then eventually he filled in that attachment with a sort of schoolroom for the kids, and a tutor lived here as well. And then in the 1920s, the house was remodeled and these wings made more livable. And then finally in 1960s, they added this front part here. And since we're talking, here's a perfect place to explain this. This is a plat or a drawing, architectural drawing by Robert Wormley Carter, the grandson of the builder. And it shows, this is his proposal to add the large portico on the front, lower the roof. He was going to add a little railing up here. That apparently never happened. And he did raise the roof on these wings and sort of combined them together. It was a mishmash. And then he proposed to have a wing to the far side, but that was not added until 1920 when they balanced this side. And so currently the house is still owned by the Carter descendants, but the house is split exactly in half. And a brother and his wife and family are on one side, and the sister and her family are on the other. And they share that big center hall. But otherwise, it's really divided into two separate apartments. So we should walk through now to Landon's bedroom. You know, bedrooms in the 18th century, the principal bedroom was usually on the first floor and usually had its own doorway outside. But this was always Landon's room. He slept here, and he had Washington sleep above him when he came. He had the principal bedroom upstairs, and Landon complained that George Washington's pacing kept him awake at night. So poor George Washington has the whole revolution on his shoulders, and he's upstairs pacing back and forth. And Washington and Landon were great friends. They addressed each other as dear chum in letters. There were a number of letters here that survived into the early 20th century, but they were eventually dispersed. So let's slip upstairs for a second and take a look up there. Now, Carrie, if you back up a little bit, we're going to look at this grand arch, and all these details are taken from Palladio Londinensis. And you can see it's an odd Virginia floor plan where the stair is not in the hall, it's set aside, set in its own special hallway. And this is giving you a signal, an architectural signal. You know, these are not bedrooms upstairs. You don't have this fully paneled grand stair hall with this twisted walnut baluster just to lead to bedrooms. It's leading to something much more important than that. And we're going to head upstairs and see that. As we head up, notice that there's no intermediate newel post. The stairway just sweeps up. They didn't want to break up that sweep with newels. So it just sweeps up from top to bottom. And there's great shaping on the right as you go up as well. And then a grand window with 24 panes that would let light flood in here. You're facing south, so the light poured in this window all day and would light really 2/3 of the room in the house. Very easy rise on the stairs. It's about 6 inches per step instead of the usual 7 or 8. Another great arch when you arrive upstairs. And then you're in another one of these great salons or saloons. You know, huge room with 6 windows, which in the 18th century is extremely rare. So you had beautiful light from both sides, and then the third set of light from the stair window. Now this room is very different from down below, even though it's the same general layout. It does have a full entablature up top, meaning it's a 3-part cornice. And when you see that little swelled cushion frieze, that's a sign that Palladio Londinensis is in the house. That means somebody's got a copy of Palladio Londinensis, because that's sort of the favorite that they pull from there. We don't have that downstairs anywhere. We have bits of it, but no room has a full entablature. And these ceilings are 6 inches higher than any other room in the house. So this was some sort of piano nobile, some grandest of grand rooms. Now the story is that they would serve
dinner up here and have dancing down below. And the inventory does show hundreds and hundreds of pieces of silver and porcelain and glass in several closets up here. And there was a service stair where you could come up as well and clean things at it. But otherwise, it was just 4 bedrooms and then this grand room. Now, how it was originally finished, we don't know. I think if you look closely, you can tell there's no raised paneling like you see in the rest of the house, in every room in the house. Instead, and I think if we walk over to this corner, it has plaster panels. And these plaster panels must have been filled with something, whether it was wallpaper or leather panels or mirrors or Chinese things. We really don't know. But there is an inscription in 1764, and that's when Buckland was doing his little bit here, and Landon was remodeling his 30-year-old house, that they did strip off whatever they had on here. So right now it's sort of a bland and pretty color, but originally with these panels filled with something grand, it must have really been something. And the other, well, several things here. These 3 library bookcases were ordered from London by Landon Carter. They've never left the house. They're originally right below us in the hall downstairs. And the other thing you get from up here is Carrie's going to walk down and show you the garden from up above, because the garden does survive from the 18th century. It's one of the best, and it has a wonderful sort of mirror image layout on the first terrace. There's 6 terraces laid out, and the whole property is laid out on 20-foot squares. You could step out originally onto a small, almost like a balcony railing, and admire the garden. But I think too here you can see the vista and almost get glimpses of the river. You get great view of the first terrace actually had a bit of a bowling green. The second terrace, which is the one with the patterns, was ornamental, purely ornamental, and you can see the paths. There are no steps. It's just ramps to facilitate carts. The next layer down had low fruits, and the next layer down had taller fruits, and the last one had real fruit trees. You can see there is an apple tree that's remained from days back. And the boxwood, there are remnants of boxwoods that showed more patterning, but they're so overgrown, it's hard to really tell what was happening. But great garden. I don't think there's a better layout that survived from the mid-18th century in America. Now we could jump into George Washington's bedroom if we want to for just a second. And I guess we could say he didn't sleep here, he paced here. But he did stay here often. And that's really the only bedroom up here that was not heavily remodeled in the 1820s redo. But it does have all of its original paneling. But very simple paneling. And there are scales of paneling throughout the house. There's an A+, and A-, and we call this sort of a B-. In the realm of paneling details, but it does have a dentil cornice. It's a nice room. It had its own little closet, which was probably the equivalent of a powder room. So now we're gonna head downstairs. You've got 50 feet of raised panels on the bottom here. An unbelievable suite of paneling. This is the A paneling with these extra moldings on the profile, and the beautiful sweep on the sort of mirror rail. We call it the mirror rail for this one. And I think that I'd be interested to see if it's actually walnut, but it was undoubtedly painted dark brown originally. And I should say the whole house interior was painted deep reddish brown, Spanish brown, probably to imitate mahogany or maybe cedar. So should we head out to the back and see if Matt has any questions for us? These plans are also listed in the work done in the 1820s.
How'd you do?
I think we did pretty well. We might have left out a few things in our little trek through. Do you think we have any questions? Do you have some questions for me?
Well, of course, Ralph. Did you get the chance to mention the garden?
We did talk about the garden.
And what do we know about the planting of the terrace from Landon Carter's era?
Well, we did talk about that. His diary does list everything from lima beans and sweet peas and lots of vegetables, but this first main garden was all ornamental, tulips and flowers, and he was sort of a complainer, and he complained a lot that he was having trouble keeping them, and at one point he said, I just want to tear the whole thing up and put grass. But he did love his garden, and he was good buddies with William Byrd, who kept a, serious garden going. He was one of the great gardeners, and he was a great patriot too. I didn't talk about it earlier, but he was a member of the Royal Society in London, and he was super scientific. He invented all these special things and did all this experimental farming. I mean, he was a bit of a crazy man, and in a good way. But a Renaissance man as well, studying, architecture. He designed and built the courthouse in nearby in Warsaw, and he designed a bridge across the Rappahannock here. I mean, he did everything. He was super busy, super industrious.
Now, you describe him as being crusty and cranky, I believe, at the end of his life.
As he got older, he was very smart and driven, and I think his kids were typical of kids of a parent like that. They were a little lazy and didn't do a whole lot, so he was disappointed by his children. They were a bit worthless. They didn't marry properly. I mean, one of them did. One of them went to Blandfield, so that was cool. But he was not a happy guy in the end, unfortunately.
There's an incredible manuscript record that describes Carter's life and his accomplishments. Can you talk a bit about the resources that you've had the chance to pull from for your work?
Well, there was an extensive inventory that lists every plate and every piece of silver and everything in the house, and it lists it by room. So that's so important. It tells us how the rooms were used in the 1770s. I mean, they did change use over the years, we can tell, but by the time he died, we had an extensive inventory. He also kept a diary, and he spoke very poorly about a large number of people, and he kept very careful records of. He did love the Talos. He and the Talos would go back and forth with each other over at Mount Airy, and they would have these wild parties, these New Year's Eve parties, and one year it'd be over there, and next year it'd be back here, but it'd be like 60, 80, 100 people. It was a wild party host, which you needed with these big rooms. It was perfect for a party.
And how far is Mount Airy from here, for those who aren't familiar with the area?
It's on the next sort of point on the river, and it's probably 5 miles. I guess it's probably 5 or 6 miles, and it too is set way back from the water, way high on a precipice. And it was built out of local stone. Here it's built out of local bricks and local stone, sort of a combination. But Mount Airy was built a bit later and copied this floor plan, which is so rare in Virginia.
And Mount Airy is also associated with the great architect William Buckland, who did just a little bit of work here, you suspect.
Since we're out here on this piazza, William Buckland did loan Landon Carter his mason. His name was Ralph, I think. And he made the capitals and the bases for the columns as originally installed on this piazza. He added the piazza in the 60s, so the 1760s. And it has a wonderful, wonderful barrel vault all the way across, which supported a tessellated black and white marble floor. So it was a grand thing. But they also finished it like a room. You can see it's been lime washed or plastered so that it felt like a room. And he loved his garden. He loved walking back and forth here. In the rain, he'd walk a mile here every day. And he loved this prospect.
So although he was a bit of a curmudgeon late in life, he was also a brilliant but social man.
He did. He was very social, very political. I mean, somebody, I can't remember, called him the greatest politician of our age. He might have called himself that. I can't remember. But he did pronounce himself, I think, one of the greatest philosophers of his age. But he was the country's dearest friend. He was well respected, but I'm not sure he was well loved. He was never elected to any big offices, and that disappointed him as well. He felt like he should have been the king, the governor or head. He should be in charge, and he was in charge here, which scared everybody away.
But for someone who played a prominent role in the repeal of the Stamp Act and was a friend of Washington, he must have had aspirations of a more central role in the Revolutionary era.
Well, I think he was very passionate about it. I mean, there is some great silver in here which we did not drag out, but he mentioned the Stamp Act, and he did write the original proclamation to repeal the Stamp Act, and he ordered 12 spoons from London, and he wrote, if the Stamp Act is repealed, make them silver, if not, horn. And the silver spoons are still in the house, and they're big ones, and it says on the back, repeal of the Stamp Act, 1764, 8, LC. So, yeah, it was cool. He was passionate and serious about that.
And through his diary and the inventory, do you have a sense of the household that lived here with him?
No. I know that he hired a tutor, just like his like Robert Carter did, who lived built onto the wing a place just for the tutor and to educate his children. And of course, there's a huge slave population as well. His brother is known as or I guess it's his nephew, Robert Carter, was known to slowly free his slaves over the years. And the Carters were, we'd like to say that they were good with their slaves. Now, it's politically tangled conversation. But when one slave boy was struck by lightning, he did find a bellows in the fireplace and, breathed life back into the boy and saved his life. But there was definitely a huge slave population here as well, and it's talked about in the in the diary. And I do think that Ralph, the stonemason, was probably a slave. It sounds like, since he was loaned out. So.
And you're an architectural purist. When we were with you in Salem, New Jersey last fall, we were talking about issues of preservation and originality. I'm sure if you had your druthers, you'd probably tear down that 1820s portico.
That'd be out of here. Yeah. That'd be gone. We'd have the big steep roof. Yeah.
But could you talk a bit about preservation generally with the house of this era and what the owners are contending with on a regular basis?
Well, it's tough every day. There's a new leak somewhere every day, as I'm sure they can testify. They're right nearby here. But the major problem with this beautiful sandstone or limestone that the house was built with, which has always been called aquia stone, because that Landon's brother Charles did own a quarry at Aquia, so we always assumed this was aquia stone. But this Virginia limestone is very soft, and it looks beautiful. The White House was built with it, and the Capitol, and it was used here extensively. But it is soft, and if it after a while it can start deteriorating. Now, originally it was all lime washed. It was lime washed white, and the lime wash will build up a crust and protect it to some degree. But over the years, certainly in the Victorian period, you know, all that was washed away. And I mean, you can look up there and see it's just deteriorating, and it's a huge, huge nightmare of a project to try and even figure out where to start to repair that. You know, do you cut out the bad parts? Do you replace everything? But they do have Ray Canetti, who's sort of the best guy in the world for that. This is probably his last project before he retires. But he is at I mean, we don't like to talk about money, but at a huge, huge cost, he is repairing this to protect it for the next generation. But you know, they're big projects everywhere, and you know, it's hard to even know where to turn. But thank goodness they're doing this with the freestone or the aquia stone, because it is deteriorating badly. And once it gets those cracks, the water gets in, and it just gets worse and worse.
Any burning questions that you have about the house that you'd love to have answers to, or areas of research you think should be done?
Well, I always have wondered, above this little central pavilion, you know, there was a big steep roof. Was there a little small triangle with it? Or was the whole cornice, was it raised up? Was the roof behind the cornice like at Rosewell? Or, you know, there was a pediment up there? I don't know. I'd like to know the original form of that. I haven't figured that out yet. I can't find it in the attic or whatever, but we do know it had a big steep roof, but we don't know what the cornice was like. In the 1730s, they were still doing shaped gables nearby and doing a lot of weird stuff. So it probably was some strange brickwork up there that we don't know what it was. That would be a big curiosity.
Well, it's always fun to have something to noodle about,
Yeah.
and chase after. But well, we're grateful for your time today, Ralph. Obviously, for the hospitality of the owners of Sabine Hall for allowing us to come here today to record the tour. What a very special experience making my first visit here. I'm so pleased and excited for this great afternoon. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom. Thank you all for joining us today. If you're not a member of the Decorative Arts Trust, please consider joining us. And as you will see or have seen, we have about 50 programs recorded on YouTube from past explorations and online presentations and panels discussions, and we're grateful for your support and enthusiasm. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
And Carrie, thank you for following me around and hopefully making me look pretty good, right?
Absolutely.
All right,
Thank you, Karen.